What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and we're back for another episode of the tutorials, and specifically in today's episode we are going to be continuing our enhanced input conversions. In our games and all of our projects, we started all of them with the regular input action and input axis system. After this point, we upgraded the projects to UE5 and we got access to the enhanced input system, but we did not convert the series to use enhanced input. I mentioned in each of the series that something I wanted to do was make sure we support both the standard input and the enhanced input systems in our games, and I still want to do this. So this is an optional tutorial to convert your series to enhanced input. If you're interested in just using enhanced input in general, you're still in the right place because I'm going to go through the whole process of setting it up for our project. That way you can use enhanced input in your game. This is part 3. We've already converted our fighter and our Super Smash Bros. Or platform fighter to use a enhanced input structure. There's still more work to be done for a full conversion, but I'm just showing you how to add all the inputs, how to make the input mapping context. Then we can get into the more specific stuff like using them on widgets and other cases like that. As I said, we're going to be focusing on our third-person action RPG series today. If you want to get caught up in this series so you can do the things that you're seeing on screen, like attack, equip different weapons and armor, look at enemy health bars, have quests that you can complete, and a whole lot more, I'll link you to the entire third-person action RPG tutorial series right here in the top right corner. Alternatively, if you only care about enhanced input, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to follow along with the whole series to watch this episode. But I do recommend you watch my introduction to enhanced input episode because that episode goes over the benefits of enhanced input as well as an entire setup in one episode. Although it's a very basic setup, it will get you very familiar with the content that we're dealing with in today's episode, which could be very useful. I'll link that right here in the top right corner as well. With that said, we're ready to get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series, but since we're focusing on enhanced input today, we don't have to go into our code except maybe to reference some of our inputs. All the logic is really going to be within the editor today. And the very first thing I would like to do is set up an area for us to store all of our enhanced inputs. So enhanced inputs are now objects or U assets. They don't go in the project settings like the old inputs do. So I want a folder to store all the inputs and the mapping context. I'm going to right click and new folder. I'm just going to call this input. You could call it enhanced input, but maybe I want to have something different in here associated with inputs in general. In here is where we're going to add our inputs. If we go up to edit project settings, we can go to the old engine input to get to our standard input actions and axis bindings. When we're in here, we can see all of our input actions and input axes. And essentially what we want to do is take each one of these, make a corresponding enhanced input action or enhanced input axis. There are technically some exceptions like reset VR. This is a default input action that came with the template. I just never removed it. We don't need to port this to enhanced input. If you're using it, by all means port it, but we are not, and we will eventually remove it, so we can skip this one. We can just go from the top though. The first one is jump. If we go to our main menu, right click, then go to input, input action, or go to add input, input action. We can call this IA for input action underscore jump. Now if we go into this, we have a few fields. We're really only going to be focusing on the description and the value types for today. There's other things that we can do that we do care about, but they're more specific. Right now I'm just porting over what we have from the project settings, which really only cares about specific inputs. So jump is spacebar and gamepad face button bottom, for example. And that means we don't really have to worry about anything else in here for the time being. We can reach parity without that. So the description is optional, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a description of what this input action handles. I typically like to put a description, even if it's very basic, like the jump input. Most of them should be very self-explanatory based on the name that we give them, but you can always add more details in here if needed. Then the next thing we care about is this value type. This determines what type of input it is. So a digital or Boolean input is an input action. It's just basically determining if you've pressed to release this input. And axis 1D is like our input axes. For example, our move forward or move right, where it's tracking the inputs, but then also the scale or the direction. So a scale of 1 here is forward, or a scale of -1 is backward. Then you have other cases as well, but they're for more advanced input with even more settings. So all of our input actions are going to be Booleans. This is super simple now. We can copy this, and for the majority of these, we can just paste them and rename them. The next one is sprint. If we copy this and paste it, we can right click on this and rename it to IA_sprint. Then we go into this one, we change the action description to the sprint input. Next one is heal. This is technically a debug feature for now, but we could definitely have a button dedicated to healing if we want. Some games do. We'll go ahead and add this. Paste it in here. You can right click and rename, or you can press F2. If I press F2, you can't really see what I'm doing. You just see that I am able to rename this, so I tend to right click IA heal. The heal input. Damage. This is a debug one to damage ourselves. Probably not relevant and still just a debug feature, so I'm going to go ahead and skip this one. Interact. This is our interaction input. This is very important. We can rename this one to IA interact. The interact input. Then we have the zoom input. This is like zoom or aim down sights or aim over the shoulder or fine aim. It has a lot of names. We just called it zoom here. So the zoom input. Then we have attack 1, like our light attack or a basic attack input. IA attack 1. Attack 1 input. Open and close menu. This is specific to opening and closing our inventory menu. It's not the same as our pause menu. This is like a secondary widget that opens up that allows us to explore things like inventory and quests. And it'll also be used for things like the map later on. I think I want to change this name in the series from open close menu to something a little bit nicer, like open secondary menu, or just maybe open menu in general. I'm not going to do that here, but what I will do is just make a new one. And we will call it IA open menu. Open menu input. Add to input buffer, special action 1, and special action 2. These 3 inputs here are used for the blueprint only input buffer, which is a mini series that we have within our third person action RPG. You can find it in Blueprints, Enhanced Input, and here is all of our data that we were using for our blueprint only input buffer. If you were following that series, feel free to use these input actions that we've already implemented, but I'm intentionally staying away from these for today's episode because the blueprint only input buffer is not a required video or episode to watch to follow along with the third person action RPG or these enhanced input episodes. So instead I'm going back to my input folder. And I am going to skip the add input to buffer, the special action 1, and the special action 2, because these are all only for the blueprint only input buffer, which as I just showed you is already taken care of. That means we'll go back to menu up. These menu ones are really no different than the other ones, but I do typically like to separate them. IA menu up. And in the description, I will say the up input for menus. That tiny little description change just makes the intention clear, even though the name really should. Next one is going to be menu down, and menu left, and menu right. The down input for menus. Menu left. The left input for menus, and the right input for menus, we need to rename this one IA menu right. Now we have menu confirm and menu back. This is like proceeding on a menu, whereas this is going to the previous screen on a menu. Menu confirm. Confirm input for menus. IA menu back. back input from menus. Then we have our lock-on ones. So target lock-on is how we can lock on to an opponent or focus on them. And then we have change lock-on target, which is how we can change between multiple targets if they're within range of being targeted and we want to target a different one. I'm going to copy one of my non-menu inputs and paste it. Call it IA lock on target, or IA target lock on, just to be consistent. But either way, as long as you know what this is, it will work. And we'll say the target slash lock on input. Then we have our change lock on target. IA, we'll actually call it cycle lock on target. That's really what we're doing here. We'll say the cycle target slash lock on input. Then we have crouch. So IA crouch. And this is the crouch input. Next was roll. IA roll. The roll input. And we have ping. This is for putting a marker in the world or pinging a location. So IA ping. Ping input. Then we have swap shoulder. So since this is third person, the character is typically not centered in the screen, and usually they're on the left side of the screen. Swap shoulder allows you to swap to the perspective where the character is on the right side of the screen. You could also call this something like change view if you want, but it is a very specific operation in third-person action RPG. So IA swap shoulder. And we'll say the swap shoulder slash change view input. Next will be our start. IA underscore start. And this will be the start slash pause input. Lastly, for our input actions, we have any key. This is just so that we can check to see if any key has been pressed or released. For example, on the press any key screen, we may want to check for this, and I think it's valid to have, so we can make an input action for it. IA underscore any key. The any key input. At that point, that's all of our input actions. The input axes, there are a lot less of, but they're still equally as important. Let's go ahead and port these over as well. I'm going to keep them in the same folder, but you could split them up by folder if you want, if that's easier. We'll call this first one IA move forward. As I mentioned, is not going to be a Boolean because the value itself, we care about the actual size or direction or whatever you're thinking this as. So we want to change the axis mappings to axis 1Ds. We'll change the description to the forward input. Now we also have the move right. IA move right. We'll say the right input. It should be an axis 1D float. Then we have things like turn rate and turn. The reason for the differences here is because turn rate is meant for inputs where we have a maximum defined by the device itself, like gamepad right thumbstick x-axis. The thumbstick can only go so far, so we have to determine what the scale should be when that input is being pressed or moved. And same with left and right on a keyboard. They can be pressed down and we need to determine their direction, but we can also choose their rate here. Turn was just for mouse X in this case, because you can do whatever you want with this. You don't really have a maximum. Your maximum is defined by your space in real life, where you can move your mouse, I suppose, but they are different. If you'd like to combine them, you definitely can. And I think for the sake of simplicity here, for our enhanced inputs, we will, but I'm not going to change them in the series unless we're absolutely sure we don't need to have both of these. What I will do is instead just copy one of our input axes, paste it here, call it IA turn, and actually I want to rename this, even though that matches the current name, to look right. I think that just makes more sense than turn. We'll say the look right input, and actually the look right / turn input. That way we're covering all of our bases. It should be an axis 1D float. Lastly, we had the same sort of system with lookup and lookup rate. The lookup rate technically didn't have the keyboard inputs like it probably should, but it has the gamepad right thumbstick y-axis here, whereas the lookup just has the mouse y. We will consolidate this as well by copying IA look right, pasting it, renaming this to IA lookup. Change the description to the lookup input, and it should be an axis 1D float. That is all of our inputs converted from basic actions and axes to enhanced inputs. The next thing that we need to do is set up our mapping context. That's where we will bind all of our inputs that we already set up in our game to these enhanced input actions. One of the huge benefits of enhanced input is that you can have multiple mapping contexts, and so you can change which controls are available to the user and which controls do what actions in the game at any point. I'm going to just put one in here. I don't need to put this in a different folder or anything like that. If you plan on having a lot of mapping contexts, you may want to put them in their own folder. If you right click and go to input, you can go to input mapping context right here. And we can just call this base mapping context. There is going to be a slight problem with this because base mapping context is the same thing that we called it for our blueprint only input buffer. And that means this could be a little bit confusing. So even though I typically call them base mapping contexts, I don't want two of the same name. I'm going to keep this one as base mapping context because that is my preferred name. And for the unique episodes for the blueprint only input buffer, I'm going to rename that mapping context to be blueprint only input buffer, BPOIB underscore base mapping context. Just so that they're different and we can support both in the project, even though we don't really need to do anything with this for today's episode. Anyway, going back to our base mapping context that we made just now, we can open it up and bring it here. The next thing that we want to do is add the description to our base mapping context. This is just like the input actions. This is optional, but it can be useful to make it known what we're setting this mapping context up for. So I will just say the base / default input mapping context for gameplay. And what we want to do is add all of the action mappings that we made. Again, we don't need to account for the blueprint only input ones, only the ones that we made today. So anything that's IA underscore. I will just add them in the order that they're at here, which is alphabetical. And now we've added all of them in here. Just going to condense these for a second or collapse them. That way it's easy for us to see what we're currently working on, and there we go. All of our input actions and input axes are now in the base mapping context. The next thing to do is make sure that we are adding the corresponding inputs from our old project settings, or old input actions and axes, to the new ones. Starting at any key, which is the first one here, you can see that the input for it is simply any key, which works for keyboard and controller. So that will be relevant and the same for our current setup. So any key. That one is super easy. Let's go to the next one, attack 1. This one is the 1 key on keyboard or gamepad right shoulder on the controller. Next one is crouch. That is the C key on keyboard or gamepad D-pad down. Next one is cycle lock on target, which is change lock on target. Remember, we slightly changed the name. That is going to be 4 on keyboard and gamepad D-pad right. Next one is IA heal. That is just H on keyboard. It really is a debug feature, as I mentioned. I know that this one could be brought into the game, and if we decide to do that, we will add a gamepad input, but for now it's just H on the keyboard. Next one is interact. That is the E key on a keyboard or gamepad face button bottom. Okay, next one is jump. Spacebar on a keyboard or gamepad face button bottom. So yes, same as interact. We can choose to prioritize interacting over jumping if we want to keep these buttons the same. That way if we have something to interact with, we do that instead of jumping. Look right. Look right is our input axis, and it is turn right and turn. We're going to add all 4 of these in with our new system. So that's mouse X, left and right on the keyboard, and gamepad right thumbstick X axis. There we go, and we got all of these. But there is something else that we have to consider here, and that is the turn rate here is okay to have a scale for 1.0 for the X and the thumbstick, but the left and right values on the keyboard are just regular inputs. They're just keys. They really only have a press and release, which means we have to determine what our scale should be for each one of them. Left is going to be -1, and right is going to be 1. In our mapping context here, we can expand left, we can add a modifier, we can select negate to change it from a 1 to a -1. And that will be all we need to do for this. Then we have look up. Similar situation here. We have mouse Y and gamepad right thumbstick Y axis. We do not have keyboard inputs for this, even though we probably should, since we have them for turn and turn rate. I'll leave it alone for now though and just bring these over. And mouse Y was negated in lookup. So look up, mouse Y, modifiers, add, negate. IA menu back. That is the Z key on keyboard and gamepad face button right. Perfect. Then we have menu confirm. X key on keyboard and gamepad face button bottom. Menu down. S key on keyboard, gamepad left thumbstick down, and gamepad D-pad down all count for this. Then we have IA menu left. A key on keyboard, gamepad left thumbstick left, and gamepad D-pad left. Menu right. We have D key on keyboard, gamepad left thumbstick right, and gamepad D-pad right. And menu up. W on keyboard, gamepad left thumbstick up, and gamepad D-pad up. Move forward. Move forward is an input axis. W, S, up, down, and gamepad left thumbstick Y axis. I'm not actually going to bring the up and down in because I believe that belongs in lookup right, just like we did with turn right and move right. Again, I'm not going to be modifying these inputs in this episode, but I'm just going to be bringing in W and S and then gamepad left thumbstick Y axis. You'll notice that S here should be negated. Modifier add, negate. Then we have move right. Move right is here. We have A, D, and gamepad left thumbstick X axis. You'll notice that A here needs to be negated. Modifiers add, negate. Then we have open menu. 2 on the keyboard and gamepad special left. Ping. Ping is 5 on the keyboard and gamepad left shoulder. Then we have roll. Roll is R on the keyboard and gamepad face button right. Sprint. Sprint is left shift on the keyboard or gamepad left thumbstick button. Then we have start. Start is P on the keyboard or gamepad special right. Then we have swap shoulder. Swap shoulder is Q on the keyboard or gamepad left thumbstick button. Target lock on. That is 3 on the keyboard and gamepad right thumbstick button. And then lastly we have zoom. Zoom is right mouse button and gamepad left trigger. And there we go. Now we've added all of our enhanced inputs to the base mapping context. In the next episode for enhanced input in our third-person action RPG, we will go over binding to the base mapping context for our character and using these inputs instead of the old ones that we have in the project settings. I hope you enjoyed this episode on converting inputs from the default input actions and input axes in Unreal to enhanced input actions and axes. If you did, please subscribe and consider joining the Patreon, YouTube membership, or Discord subscriptions to help benefit the channel. I appreciate it and it helps me so much. Thank you so very much to everyone who already has. You guys are amazing. If you ran into any problems following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There is a link in the description and I would be happy to help you out. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.